Good afternoon to everybody, and welcome back to our weekly COVID update. Welcome back to myself. It was lovely having a break for a week, always too short, but it was great. But also great being back with you all. So let's get started with where we are. Sorry about the delay. All right, there we are. I guess 1 week in the game reserve and you forget which buttons to press. But here we are. Okay, so nothing really to report on the epidemic curve. We really come down our third wave. We're at baseline. This is really what we expected, and nothing has really changed with regard to that. I'll get the pointer up. Our daily change of new cases, really between about 100 and 300 new cases per day. So a low level, still cases, hasn't disappeared. And if you look at the Hasola data, in fact, last week they had 10 new cases. This week up to the present, in fact, they've already had 11 cases, 2 clusters of cases. So there is still some virus circulating. It hasn't completely disappeared. But yes, the percentage of test positivity also confirming that we're really at the lowest level since the pandemic began. So that's all very, very good news. An interesting phenomenon I actually wanted to kind of point out is that while the COVID level is low, what has increased quite markedly is influenza, flu. It came as a bit of a surprise, but it really shouldn't be a surprise. This was data that the NICD gave to me only this morning. And it really started from week 34, so as a couple of months ago. There's quite a steep, about 8 weeks ago, a steep increase in influenza to where we are today. And you can see there's quite a large number of influenza cases. They pick it up on a monitoring program. They get specimens from family practitioners who take a specimen from their patients, and they get analyzed at the NICD. And it gives them a measure of the amount of influenza that's circulating. So I guess we shouldn't be too surprised, because what has happened both last year as well as this year with the COVID respiratory infection preventive measures, the masking, the physical distancing, and so on and so forth, this has impacted on influenza as well. So last year we had a very, very low level of influenza, and this winter also a very low level. But what has happened, because of this low level and the suppression of the circulation of the virus, less and less people have been affected, and therefore more and more people become susceptible to flu. So there's been this buildup of susceptibility. And now, of course, going into our summer, and this, of course, this rise is very unusual for the summer season. But what has happened going into us, people are being a bit more lax with regard to the respiratory infection preventive measures, the physical distancing, the masking, and so on and so forth. So influenza now is taking advantage of this situation, and it has now taken the place of COVID. It's a bit of a problem because, influenza, the clinical symptoms are very, very similar, if not identical in many cases, to those of COVID. So it does pose a diagnostic problem for those family practitioners out there. But it's quite an interesting thing because it really kind of illustrates how important these preventive measures are. In fact, not only for COVID, but for all respiratory infections, because that's the way that these viruses are spread. But now let's come to what really is bothering us, what really is a major problem for the Department of Health, for our vaccine Ministerial Advisory Committee, for all the authorities there. And that is that the vaccination rollout is really slowing down to quite a concerning degree. So this is where we are at the moment. Up to yesterday, 24 million doses have been administered. About a third, just over a third of individuals, shall I say adults, these are adults that's over the age of 18, have been fully vaccinated. 40% have been either fully vaccinated or partially with one dose of Pfizer vaccine. This is the adult population. I'll come just now to the teenagers over the age of 18. So this is kind of far short of really where we need to get to if we want to get to our target of the great majority, 70 to 80% of the adult population vaccinated as soon as possible. Clearly, the target of the end of the year is unattainable. We're not going to get there. It's going to go stretch well into next year now. So that really is a bother. It really is a worry. Now we look at the total number of vaccines administered yesterday, the last 24 hours, 134,000 is really way below the target. We had to have been up to fairly recently 250,000. In fact, now as we are reducing the amount that we immunize every day, so our target is progressively increasing. And we need to get now at least double this, if not more, to try and get to immunizing the majority, of get population immunity, certainly in the early part of next year, if not going into the middle of next year now. So this really is worrying. The provinces, the Western Cape doing the best, nearly half of the adult population being vaccinated. Gauteng province still lagging behind, only 37% of the adult population being vaccinated. Now let's look at the high priority groups, the highest priority group, the elderly, the 60 plus age group. 63.7% being vaccinated either fully or partially. The 50 to 59 group, 57.78, 58%. Partially vaccinated or fully vaccinated. Fully vaccinated, it's a bit less. The 60 plus age group, 56%, 50 to 59, 52%. So there's still quite a wide gap, even in the highest priority group of the older individuals. We need to kind of fill this gap in as soon as possible, because otherwise when the fourth wave comes, there's certainly going to be a high load of seriously affected individuals in the healthcare system unless this gap is filled pretty rapidly. And that really must remain our main priority. And I'll come to it just now, our main priority in the vaccination rollout program. Right, then look at the teenage group. And again, we are falling behind here. Only 5% of teenagers. The teenage population between 12 and 17 is about 6 million. About 5% only have so far been vaccinated. The Department of Health feels that, well, maybe when the schools break up and children have more time to get to vaccination sites, because in the public schools, remember, they're not vaccinating at schools itself. Maybe this will kick up. But I think a main problem here is vaccine hesitancy. I think that really is a big issue. And I think that really segues into a number of the questions, and I really want to kind of deal with vaccine hesitancy, because not only is it a problem for us, it is a problem out there, and I'm getting a number of questions relating to vaccine hesitancy. So I'll start off with one that has come in, and I think we have to remember that now with social media, with Facebook, with Twitter, with all that's going on, the population is really bombarded with information, and also misinformation, and sometimes mischievous misinformation. So really, it's so critical that people examine the source of where they kind of base their opinions on, the source of the infection, of the information. And if you really look at, there are really three groups of information related to COVID. There's science which is peer-reviewed, which is evidence-based, etc. Good, authentic science, that's the one group. Then we get pseudoscience. That's science, really, that's science fiction, it's conspiracy theories, that's kind of things which are really sometimes are really weird and wonderful, and it defies logic that people genuinely are propagating this information and people are really falling for it or swallowing it. And then we get a third group, which is what I'd call maverick scientists. Now, I've had experience with maverick scientists. If you recall in the Alden Becker era, when there was this denial of HIV, and he set up this AIDS Advisory Council, which I had the misfortune to serve on. And there were the scientists, the genuine scientists, I like to call myself a genuine scientist, and also the AIDS dissidents, the people who said either there's no such a thing as HIV, or if there is HIV, it doesn't call AIDS. And I must tell you that the leader of the group that came out of this country, in fact, a guy called Peter Duisberg, is a very reputable scientist. In fact, he was nominated for the Nobel Prize, did a lot of work on tuberviruses, very esteemed scientist. But he went maverick, unfortunately. And it seems that a lot of scientists at the end of their careers become maverick. They come with weird and wonderful ideas. And Peter Duisberg was one of them. In fact, at the time, there was also a Nobel Prize winner, a guy called Kary Mullis, a Nobel Prize winner, who also was an AIDS denier, said that HIV did not cause AIDS. Fast forward to where we are now, COVID. I'm sure many of you heard of Luc Montagnier. Luc Montagnier is the guy who initially isolated the HIV virus in the middle of the 1980s and won the Nobel Prize for it. And he's an anti-vaxxer. He's an anti-vaxxer. So this is one of the problems. We do get medical professionals who are also anti-vaxxers, anti-maskers, and so on. So, Adam, am I still on? I see there's a, I guess I am still on. Okay, let me carry on then. And I think it's very important that people do navigate through a lot of what is misinformation to try and get genuine, authentic. So how do you get authentic scientific information? As I said, there are maverick scientists there. There are maverick medical professionals there who are espousing all kinds of misinformation. I think the important thing is to try and get information from reputable bodies, from the World Health Organization, from the Center for Disease Control in the United States, from the Center for Disease Control, European Center for Disease Control, from Public Health England, from these reputable bodies. In this country, it's the National Institute for Communicable Diseases, the NICD, the Medical Research Council, and so on. These are reputable bodies where groups of experts come together and they give expert opinion, and that is reliable information. So I think it's just going back to the questioner who said, have I heard of Dr. Vladimir, just to give you some example of the misinformation, have I heard of Dr. Vladimir Zelenko? No, I hadn't. I looked him up on the internet, and Dr. Vladimir Zelenko is a Orthodox Jewish fellow, a Haredi guy, who's been propagating chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine, and actually he's been investigated by the federal prosecution for false claims of cures. He's been expelled from his community of Kiryat Yovel. So this is one of these guys. Peter McCulloch, I certainly have heard of. Peter McCulloch is a guy in the United States, a cardiologist. And the person that sent this in said he's published over 40 articles. Well, it's not difficult to publish articles. There are what we call predatory publications. Predatory publications are these publications that solicit publications. They're not peer-reviewed, and they will publish whatever you send them because they want to get their journals out, which they can sell. So having published doesn't really mean anything. And this fella, the way I know him, is that he's one of these so-called experts in the court case, the case which is in the High Court at the moment, which has been brought about by the ACDP to get an urgent court interdict to stop or to stop the adolescent immunization. That's where I came across him. And then there was another named Judy Mikovits I'd never heard of, who's really way out. I mean, she's saying that masks cause COVID. She's been saying that the influenza virus contains retroviruses. I mean, all kind of crazy stuff. So, unfortunately, these are some of the kind of information it does. But I really urge people to look very carefully where you get information. One of the things which came up was from this group, that children have natural immunity, and is it a disadvantage to vaccinate them because of natural immunity? The other way around. Natural immunity is immunity which you get after one has been infected. It's not a kind of a mysterious thing which all of us got, which is natural. It is the immunity you get after you've been infected. And on the contrary, people that had natural immunity, if they do get the vaccine, they get a superb immune response. And this is why we actively do encourage people that have been infected to supplement their immunity with a vaccine. All right, so much for vaccine hesitancy. There's also a large number of questions I'm getting about the boosting, about the extra dose. What we mean by boosting is that the normal vaccination for Johnson & Johnson is one vaccine shot. The normal course for the Pfizer vaccine is 2 shots separated, ideally 6 weeks apart. That's the normal. So anything which gets administered over and above that is an extra dose, is boosting the immunity from the initial vaccination. Now, the boosting in this country is only being given to 2 groups of individuals. It's the individuals who registered for the Sisonke study, and these were the healthcare workers. Unfortunately, there were a lot of individuals who are non-healthcare workers who unauthorizedly, or I won't say illegally, unauthorizedly, also got themselves onto the healthcare package, and they will there be part of this the Sisonke cohort. So those individuals are being offered a second Johnson & Johnson vaccine, what you call a homologous boost. Homologous is the same vaccine. There is some controversy whether the boosting should be heterologous, using another vaccine, in other words, in this case, Pfizer. I'm not going to deal with it today because of time. Maybe I can deal with it next week. Is there any advantage of heterologous, in other words, Pfizer as the booster, rather than homologous Johnson & Johnson? I personally had my Johnson & Johnson this last Sunday. So that's the one group, the healthcare workers, the people that were registered on the Sisonke study. The second group who are getting a booster are the people who are immunocompromised. In other words, whose immune system is compromised either by disease such as HIV or by treatment, for example, for cancer and so on. Their immune system hasn't responded adequately or satisfactorily to the vaccine. So they are being offered an extra dose to try and get that immunity going so they do become immune. So those are the 2 groups who are being offered a booster dose. Now, there is a major problem which is developing, and that relates to travel, because countries, particularly Israel is the main one really, which are stipulating that you have to have been vaccinated at least within 6 months or have a 3rd booster. Now, unfortunately, in our country, because of what I've mentioned up to now, we've still got a way to go to try and get even the 1st dose to the majority of people in this country. It will not be possible from our Department of Health to get a booster for travel purposes, unfortunately. So this is not a medical issue. It's really a policy, a regulatory issue. Unfortunately, I can't offer more than just to liaise with the various consulates of Israel Center. In the case of Israel, they are making some exceptions, and then to individual countries. I know countries like the United Kingdom, I think USA as well, do accept if you've had your vaccine, that's it. You don't need to, they're not stipulating that it has to be done for the last 6 months, but there may be updated information which I've missed out. I can just advise you to please check with your travel agency if it's a travel issue, or the consulate for the latest updated information with regard to that. And just 1 or 2 other questions just to quickly round off. My thoughts on 5 to 12-year-olds being vaccinated. Yes, I mean, that would be ideal. We want to try and immunize as many people as possible. 5 to 12-year-olds are probably not quite as important as a reservoir infection. They don't transmit infection quite as readily as older children or teenagers. And also, if they do get infected, they are usually very mildly infected. So that would be a lower priority group, but many countries, Israel, United States, and so on, they've licensed the vaccination for 5 to 12-year-olds, and they're implementing it. I think it'll be quite a long time in this country before we get to 5 to 12-year-olds. And then finally, I'll talk about the oral COVID vaccine. That's very exciting research. I think we're running out of time, so I don't want to kind of go through it too quickly. So maybe I'll keep that for next week. And also what I carried over from last time, the issue about the differential reporting of active cases between the Western Cape and the national figures. I'm sorry, I haven't got data on that as yet. So again, I'll try and deal with that next week. So thank you everybody for listening, and have a good day. Keep well, keep safe, and all the very best. Bye-bye.